everybody. Thank you so much for joining another interview of Magnifying Our Impact. And today I'm with a wonderful lady who is the CEO of the Charity Finance Group, who makes a massive impact on all of us within the sector to be able to give us the opportunities and the impact and the way forward in which we can really make a difference to so many other people out there. So with that, I'd love to introduce Caron Bradshaw. And Caron I've been chatting to you over a few times now. I know you've come so highly recommended from the sector to me with regards to this interview. And I find you incredibly modest and humble with regards to everything that you're currently achieving, your organisation is achieving, and you and yourself. So please, over the next 40 minutes, don't be too humble and modest, because we want to really know about all your achievements, and we want to stand on your shoulders and understand how we can grow something as you have. I know that you've got so many accolades within you. You've obviously worked incredibly hard in your career. You're a trained barrister. It seems like you're a wonderful mom with a really big heart. You're an artist. You're into amateur dramatics. There's loads there and I'm sure, you know, I'm just touching the surface. And you're a CEO of a really important organisation. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about, you know, how you look at the world and how you look at change today. And so my first question, I think this is a great question to start with, Caron, which is, where did this all start?
I remember doing sort of social activities, even when I was, you know, in the days when you were allowed to go and shop for your little old ladies down the road. My parents used to call it the granny run. And I used to literally spend the lane I lived in had got house after house after house of little old ladies and little old men. And I used to just go and sit, talk to them, go and do their shopping. And when I started driving, that then sort of moved into taking them to garden centres, you know, things like that. Always thought I wanted to be a barrister. So I represented my father at a planning tribunal when I was 15.
Wow, 15?
Yeah, I was a bit precocious. I always thought that's what I would do, that I'd go off and, you know, represent people and argue for social good, etc. But when I got to being at the bar, I realised that actually the profession was very different to the one that I'd seen through my rose-tinted glasses. That I recognised that the reality was very different to the kind of spectacle I'd built in my mind.
Yes.
And that was probably the biggest changing point, actually, was suddenly realising that, having worked towards doing this career at the bar, that halfway through my bar vocational course I thought, I don't want to do this. This isn't what I want to do. But my parents had remortgaged their house to put me through this course, so I kind of felt like I ought to
absolutely
complete the course. And I'm really glad that I did, because it gave me so much in the way of skills and confidence and the ability to think on my feet, or at least perhaps that was always there, the ability to sort of shape that and articulate my thoughts whilst under pressure and on the go. So yeah, I kind of fell into this job in the sense that I then went and volunteered for our local Citizens Advice Bureau, and I did all of their representation work for best part of a year, and I loved it, but obviously it wasn't paying the bills. I went to work for an organisation called the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales as a sort of stopgap measure, and I spent 16 years there.
Wow. Okay.
So it was one of those places where you could go to the HR team and say, do you know what, I've never done that job over there, but I quite fancy it and I think I can do it. And they time and time again allowed me to do things that I'd not got any experience in, and that meant that I got this really unique view on a whole load of different things, from ethics through to member services through to policy work, that I just wouldn't have had if I'd gone onto the outside world, because I didn't have any track record with it. So that kind of all led towards this current job, because it gave me all the elements. It gave me the sort of membership piece, the member services, the charity piece, the technical piece, the policy work. So it kind of just screamed Caron once the job came up. But I didn't think I'd get the job. Of course, I hadn't got any CEO or even senior experience. I hadn't been a director up to that point. I'd never run anything in terms of paid employment. So it was, it was kind of luck, perhaps a little bit good fortune, timing wise. I don't know.
And so tell us about your current role.
So CFG, it's a membership organisation, so it's a charity itself. But what we try to do is support organisations to maximise their impact. If you think about it in terms of your sort of skill set, the person that, other than the CEO, that has that sort of helicopter view across the whole of the organisation is your finance person. Yet what we've tended to do is put finance professionals in a box. So we think of them as being the person you wheel out to say no, or to cut the budget, or to cut back. But actually, the skill set that a finance professional has, and that ability to sort of look across the whole piece, if you can tap into that, then you can really maximise the impact, your growth, the value up. And so, having worked with accountants for most of my career up to that point, and having this sort of passionate personal engagement with charity, which I'd done sort of alongside my paid jobs, it just felt like it got my name written on it.
Caron, you mentioned something there which is really valuable for me to explore for all of us. I'm fascinated by the confidence and the psychology that you have internally, because that's really where it all starts in leadership to me. And so where do you think this has come from? What do you tell yourself when things get tough? Because, so I've asked you two questions there. I suppose the first question is, sometimes it's genetics or it's innate or something, that people just have a way of having confidence and saying, I deserve this, I'm going to go for this. Fear doesn't come in, I'm just going, I'm doing it. And so talk to me about, where does that come from, and what is that in you?
So the funny thing is, a lot of people will say, oh, I'm massively confident, and I am to a large extent, but I also have just the same fears and worries that everyone else.
Yeah, we're human.
And I have been crippled by those from time to time. I have had crippling lack of self-confidence. When people talk about things like imposter syndrome, gosh, I know that feeling. Okay. But I was really blessed with my parents. My parents were kind of the good life, Barbara and
yes
Tom. That was my parents. My parents turned veggie over 50 years ago. They bought this old farmhouse that I now live in, because I bought it from them 20 odd years ago. They were very alternative, so they were very sure of who they were, and they instilled in me and my brothers a real sense of who we were. And although I don't think it's true for everyone to be able to say that whatever you want to be, you can be it. You don't face any barriers. It's very easy to say as a white privileged woman that I can be whatever I want to be. But I do believe that they gave me a mindset of abundance, not deficit. So I'm really capable of making the most of whatever I've got. And I don't have to have a perfect, if you cook with me, for example, I'm not one of these people that can't create something if the ingredients isn't in my cupboard. I can make from what I have. And that level of confidence that there's always a way through when you've got a will, I think has probably been what set me on the path to thinking that, I can do that. And even if I can't do it, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to learn something about myself that I can. And that was the attitude I went into the job application with CFG for. It was very much, I don't expect to get this, but what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is I learn what I need to learn in order to get a CEO role, that I can shape and pick up my skills and pivot my career to wherever I need to go in order to achieve that. So, maybe that's part of the reason why they kept saying come back, because I kept going, I can do that.
That piece of you know, knowing that what fear is, but the eradication of fear and just saying what's the worst that can happen and just going for things in life is so immensely valuable. And we've all heard all the quotes and the examples given through history of people just, you know, taking the opportunity and running with it and just seeing it as a learning opportunity. But when you have the strength that you have and you're put in the position of responsibility that you are, when you look at all of this turbulence and this difficulty and this trauma that people have been through, Caron, what advice would you give to charity CEOs that are really struggling right now, that see a mountain in front of them? How would you feel? What would be your 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you're taking for yourself right now on a way forward? What are the most important things that a CEO needs to think about right now when there's trauma around?
So the way that I've done it, and I wouldn't say this is necessarily absolutely the blueprint for every organisation, but the way that we've done it within CFG is that we've looked at what are the things that we need to, almost broken it up into 3 chunks. You've got the crisis time, you've got what do we need to do to get through the current situation. Then you've got the thinking, what is the future going to be like? What's the kind of 12, 18 months, 2, 3 years? And then you've got that bridging piece between the two. And I think that there's a huge temptation for people to assume that what you need right now to get through the crisis is what you're going to need in 12, 18 months time. So you hear lots of people talking about, we'll never go back to working in offices, for example. And that might be true for some organisations, that they don't need an office, and that what this has done is prompted them to think about why they use an office, whether or not an office is actually just something that you've always done out of habit almost, or whether it genuinely is a function of the organisation that it needs to have a sort of social hub or whatever it might be. And there's a great temptation, I think, to sort of throw out those things that you need right now as being a permanent thing that you need for the future. So I think, you know, for us, it has been very much about breaking it up and looking at it. You know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You have to break it down, otherwise it just feels like this huge, overwhelming, too big a thing. And by being able to sort of bring your lens almost in, so that you're focusing on the stuff right in front of you, and then you're broadening out the lens and you're broadening out the lens, it enables you to think logically and to test your assumptions. You know, I think we're very good at making causal links between different things. Our brain wants to kind of rationalize things. So you see something and you make an explanation about it, and that makes logical sense and you're wedded to it, rather than having this sort of brain of critically analysing what is in front of you and testing it and saying, well, what does that mean? And does that take us to the next step? So I guess what I'm describing is something called solutions focus, where you say, where is it that we want to get to? And what's the biggest step I can take right now? And then what can I look forward? How realistic and how firm? And obviously the further out you go, the less clear and certain those assumptions are, but you can nonetheless make some assumptions, and then you test them as you go through, and you apply what you learn, and you then look again, and you tweak and change as you go, rather than having this sort of clear fixed line that takes you nav approach rather than a roadmap. You know, there aren't fixed routes that we need to go down. We need to just sort of tweak and look at what the obstructions are that we come across when we reach them. And that makes sense.
And it really does make sense. And it's staying in the present and understanding what you need right now and what resources, and having a vision for the future at the same time. It makes perfect sense to me, and operating on what's necessary now and how to get through this, and then to have a vision for the future. And I guess bridge those 2 elements of time. With regards to that, you mentioned something that, to me, you know, it's interesting. When you were saying it, I was thinking about my kids, because they had a wonderful teacher once which talked to them about, you know, a flexible mindset and a fixed mindset. Yeah. And, you know, I think so many of us have been conditioned into having this fixed mindset, and now it's all been thrown up in the air, and we've got to learn to have this flexible, creative mindset. And I also heard once that the person with the most flexibility has the most power. At a senior level, you have the ability to be able to jump in the helicopter, see the whole piece and make decisions on now and your crisis room where you can get through this and look at the future. How do you take everybody else with you on that journey? So my next question is about culture, because in your virtual boardroom right now, have the ability and the history and, you know, the knowledge to be able to do that. Talk to me about how do you get rid of fear right now in your people and take that fear and make it into confidence?
Wow. Okay, so the first thing I want to just sort of say is that I try not to make too many decisions, and then that sounds like I sort of go, yes, get everyone else in. But do you know what? I'm the CEO. I'm not the commercial services director or the finance or the policy person. I know all of those areas, and I'm, you know, kind of, I'm a jack of all trades, and I would like to think that I could turn my hand to any of the areas within the organisation. But actually what I want to do is be the person that asks the questions, and almost like a coaching style almost.
Yes.
I don't want to be the one that makes a decision on everything, not because you know, I don't want the responsibility of it, but actually I don't think I'm going to make the best decisions. You know, if I'm the most sensible or the cleverest person in the room or the one with all the solutions, I'm in the wrong room, frankly. I want to be surrounded by people that know way more than me in each of their areas. I remember the first interview process that I went through, and my boss, who I was interviewing with, we had a brilliant standout candidate, but she didn't fit the mould of what we would have normally employed, and particularly her voice was very, she was a bit blimey, and therefore her class didn't seem quite to fit with the kind of people we were speaking to. And I remember the boss basically squashing us offering her the job because she wouldn't come across right, which really grated with me. And I was talking to my dad about it, and he said to me, Caron, when you employ people in the future, you need to ask yourself two questions. One, do I want to bathe in their glory? Or two, do I want to pick up their shit? And it stuck with me forever, because I don't want to be constantly picking up after people. If I only employ people that are less than me, why am I bothering? I may as well do it myself.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to be forever picking up after them and trying to cover their problems and their errors and their deficits.
I get that.
If I get somebody that really is a fantastic, going to blow me out water, then I can bask in their glory forever.
Yeah, that's very bright. Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So the first bit is, I don't think that as a CEO we should be seeking to make the decisions. I think if command and control ever worked, I don't think it works now.
Yeah, get it.
What we should be doing is getting out the way. We should be pushing the decisions to the people that are closest to the knowledge, that have the skills, and we should be getting out the way of them. Yeah. But our absolute role should be to be able to look across the whole organisation and go, well, let me just test that assumption. Have you asked? And once we're satisfied that somebody has gone through that thought process and has, you know, asked the questions and done the testing and kicked the tires a bit, then just because we'd have come to a different decision, I don't think necessarily should mean that we overrule or change those decisions. So part, I guess, in answer to the question that you asked around the cultural piece is, for me, if you came into the organisation and you spent, you know, some time watching the demographics and the way that we talk to each other, you probably wouldn't know that I was the CEO to begin with.
Yeah.
Because I don't have an office. I don't.
Sure.
Over people. I'm just one of the team.
And you know, the two values that come to me is that creates a sense of empowerment in people, doesn't it? And they know that they're trusted.
Lynn Berry is a brilliant woman in the sector. She said, when she opened our conference a few years ago, she said, when we talk about empowering our staff, we're asking the wrong question. We should be asking, what is it that we do that disempowers them? And I think that's brilliant. You know, I can't empower somebody, but I can remove the barriers that are acting as a blockage to them. And I think the other thing with culture is that I think we have to encourage people to bring their whole selves to work, to be a whole person, because I think only by you know, going back to that sort of applied improv type mindset, that sort of utilizing everything you've got. You can only utilize everything you've got if you've got permission to bring it all to the workplace. If you're constantly compartmentalizing and saying, well, that's not professional, or that's not,
sure,
then you're kind of already restricting the resources that you can bring into play.
Yeah, and one model that's clearly coming to us faster and faster is the sense of entrepreneurship, because I think the world now, you know, like you say, the old models are just going to be destroyed in the future. I think we can't operate like that anymore. When you have a team right now that has been through a lot, because I think there's a lot of people listening to this that are charity CEOs or managers or directors or what have you, and the culture isn't what they want it to be, and it's not working. How do you change something that, where there's a team that isn't working? What's your advice as to how to change that? If you just take on a team, or something's gone wrong, or right now people have lost people through redundancy or what have you, how do you change it from a place of fear and it's not working to a place of it working? Have you got any tips as to, you know, what would you do to operate quickly in a place where the culture isn't where you want it?
So we went through a massive cultural change program at CFG. So hopefully what I'm saying kind of builds on some of the lessons that we learned there. The first thing that we did is I got a professional in to do a bit of diagnostic work, because I think, going back to what I said earlier, we'd like to try and make sense of stuff, and therefore, because we bring ourselves to it, we will naturally bring our own biases to it. We will, you know, we'll try and make sense of, and we'll read things and make causal links between stuff that aren't actually there. Whereas if you bring a sort of diagnostic tool to something, it has a level of objectivity, and it enables you to see information and data as evidence rather than
as it really is. Yeah.
So that was the first thing we did. We got a company, and I can't remember what the name is, which will infuriate me because she was brilliant. But yeah, we had this diagnostic tool come in. They asked questions of every single member of staff at all levels of the organisation, including the trustees, and then they gave us a report back on what were the areas of activity where we needed to really think through what actions we might be able to take. And a lot of it for us, and I probably would have denied this if I'd have been left to my own devices rather than having a diagnostic tool, was around sort of performance management, that the level of management within my organisation. I'd got some brilliant managers and they were great technically at what they were doing, but they were not necessarily equipped with the skills to be able to support their teams in maximising their outputs and their accountability and their responsibility. We're probably in the same position as an awful lot of people, where you promote somebody who's good at their job rather than necessarily equipping them as managers, as people that can deal with people, who can bring people. So there was a lot of that, I think, where we had not necessarily played to people's strengths. So recognising and confronting and accepting actually performance management was an issue within the organisation, and we needed to do something about it, but we also needed to do something about it without attaching blame or saying you're the problem. That was quite tough, but having that sort of diagnostic piece enabled us to say, this isn't what I'm saying, this is what we're saying as a whole. Then I think the second thing was really understanding about creating a space. So I think this is one thing that absolutely leaders have to do. They have to really be clear what their vision, their purpose, what's the space they want to create, and then the invitation is made. This is the space that I'm going to hold. You can come into it with me and we can take this into a wonderful place, or you can choose not to. But choosing not to means I probably have to help you find something else to do that's outside of CFG.
Yes.
Because it's a non-negotiable space. This is what the culture needs to be, in my view, as long as I'm CEO. And actually that was a difficult realization for me too, because again, this diagnostic tool, the lady that ran it is called Talita Ferrier, and she's brilliant, used to be the CFO at BMW. So a finance person, spoke the sort of language that we did. And she asked me one day why I was not committed to the program. And I was like, I think I am committed to the programme. But what I realised was I was pulling back from it. I wasn't 100% saying, this is non-negotiable, this is the space, join me with it, or don't join me with it, and that's okay.
Powerful. Yeah.
But it's not conducive, it's not compatible with you staying here if you don't want to be part of this journey. And that, you know, that was quite tough to recognise that I hadn't fully articulated my commitment to it and really stuck with it. And that was a real turning point, because the energy that came from me recognising that I hadn't actually committed to it fully, that I was holding back slightly, and then just actually being really vocal about this is the space, and you can step into it or you can choose not to. But if you choose not to, that means I need to help you find something else to do, because this is not the place for you.
You
know, that level of commitment, I think, to culture is one of those things that it takes an awful long time, I think, to change, but it takes an awful lot of commitment to stick to it. That's
super valuable. I always think of this gentleman, and I don't know, I'm sure you've heard of him. One of my favourite books is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and he was an eminent psychiatrist in the 30s that was captured by the Nazis and went to the death camps for 4 years, and he wrote this wonderful book and spoke for the rest of his life on the power of purpose. And he said between stimulus and response there's a space, and in that space is our ability to be able to choose our response, and in our response is our growth and our freedom. And I really see that in what you've said, is that, you know, I have never thought of, until you said it there, I've never thought of organisational culture like that. Is if you give people the space and articulate it and create a vision, and if they're willing to have the courage and the persistence to step into that, then you, like you say, you're going to have the opportunity to create something wonderful. If you don't want to do that, then that's fine. But this is the platform. This is what we're offering. And I guess the key to that, Caron, in these times is for people, because there's so much uncertainty at the moment, isn't there? Is for you to, you know, leaders of organisations to be able to give people that space, know what that space is, because that's probably the fear, is that people don't know that space anymore, and they need that space. They need to be told what that space is. What do you think is the biggest challenge at the moment, Caron, in the world, and how in our own little or big ways can we overcome these challenges? I mean, what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about with us lot? What do you worry about in the world? What's our biggest challenge, and how can we look to overcome it or manage it?
So I personally have felt for quite some time that, and I preface this by saying any ism, I think in its purest form is of no use, but actually all of them have some use. So communism in its purest form is not a good thing, but some of the essence of it are pretty good. Capitalism in its purest form is not good. So I think we have so bought into a consumer approach, a disposable approach, a extraction approach, that the biggest challenge that we globally face is that shifting a mindset away from the metaphors of war and sport and conquering and extraction into one of how do we work with what is here? How do we thrive? How do we take lessons from nature? You know, how do we find ways through that mean that we don't just take, that we give as well? And that for me is the biggest challenge. You look at things like the political environment in the States. Yes. That polarization all has its roots in extraction. What's in it for me? How do I, you know, it's that zero-sum game. In order for me to benefit, you have to lose. And it's that kind of, that sort of mentality, I think, is probably the biggest challenge, without sort of sounding too sort of pageantist about it. You know, if we don't face that, the planet will be all right, but I don't think the human race will be. No, 100%. Couldn't agree more. And so the impossible question that I'm sure you're going to answer very well, how do we do that, Caron? How do we change 200,000 years of us learning to be selfish? Yeah, well, I mean, we said right at the beginning, it's funny how, isn't it, how conversations go round in circles a little bit. So just like the how do we deal with our own individual organisations, we have to break it down into what do we need to do right now, what's the biggest step we can personally take, and then think what's the biggest step our organisation can take, and then think, because I think the problem is with a lot of the way that we've talked about the problems of the world and society generally, they tend to be what I kind of characterise as switch off moments. You know, you're either preaching to the converted, so everyone's in an echo chamber going, yeah, we've absolutely got to do that, or you're switching people off because it's just too big.
Yes.
You know, it's too much for them to take.
Yeah.
One of my big
Absolutely.
influences is a woman called Belina Raffi, who is an applied improviser. She's fantastic, love her to bits. And she uses comedy and teaches it to climate scientists, to how do they use comedy and humour to make something accessible to people for whom the information is just too big. It's too big a problem.
Right.
You know, how do you counteract the view? I don't know if you're an ex-smoker, but if you're an ex-smoker, you see cigarette adverts on TV for, you know, giving up cigarette. The first thing I want to do, having not smoked for years, is reach for a packet of cigarettes. So what is it about our psychology that when we talk about these huge problems, we switch people off, or we kind of reinforce their views that it's other people's problems, other people have to change. So for me, that's the thing. We have to start thinking about what can we personally do? How do we personally take responsibility? What are the small things we can do? Then what our organisations can do, and then what can we collectively do?
What are your 3 biggest learnings in your life based on what we've just talked about? What are the 3 biggest successes or learning points that have taught you about how to give as opposed to take, and how to work with nature as opposed to how to extract? What are the biggest metaphors or the learnings that you've had that have made you successful in this way, that you have this mindset, this inclusive, natural mindset? And maybe it's the fact that you were grown up in a place where for half a century your parents have been vegetarians. I don't know. It's, you know, that helps, right? But what are your biggest lessons in this, and how have you shaped your way of thinking to be inclusive?
So I would say I've probably grown and developed more over the last 5 years than I did over the previous 45. I had a pretty much what you would call a breakdown in 2014, 2015. As a result of literally exhausting myself. You know, I did all of the things that I've just said you shouldn't do as a boss. I did as a boss. So I broke my organisation. I was the one that had to fix it. You know, instead of tapping into my team, I tried to protect them. And I was literally doing like 16-hour, 17-hour working days, and I burnt myself out in a very, very big way. And hitting rock bottom, particularly when you wonder if there's a way of you coming back out from that rock bottom, is quite a learning process. You know, I wouldn't wish it on somebody, but if you gave me all the money in the world to not go through that experience, I would say keep the money, because it changed me profoundly. It was a real breakthrough moment in my mentality and my psychology, because when you realise that everything is kind of rock bottom and you think, gosh, I can't fall any lower, you then step back and start actually unpicking some of that. And you do what's the worst that could happen? Okay, the worst that can happen, I lose my house. Okay, I lose my house, but I've got a really lovely old house with lots of equity in it. That's an awful lot better than an awful lot of people. You know, if I lose a job, I can get another job. I've still got my family and my support network. So it took me to a place that enabled me to examine who I was and what I was trying to achieve and why I'd got to where I was, and kind of made sense of an awful lot of experiences that I'd had growing up that started to make me realise actually some of these things have been great learning points that I if I'd have been open and aware of those and be receptive and self-aware, I could have applied them to the situation I was in and prevented myself having as much pain as I did. And so therefore, every situation I now go into, kind of have I want to give the best of myself. I want to leave, I don't really mind where I end up, as long as I leave you with the best impression of me, and I will give you me. I'm not going to give you a sugar-coated me, or I think you want to hear about me. This is me. You will like me or you won't like me, and that's okay. But I need to be able to look at the person in the mirror and say, I like you, and I know you, and I embrace every element of you. That was kind of a big turning point for me. And then I've had probably two other very pivotal people. One of them, my last mentor, a lady called Britta Fernandes-Schmidt, who's the Chief Executive of Women for Women International. Fantastic woman. And I asked her to be my mentor because I thought I'd got to a point with CFG where I'd done everything I could do. I'd used all my tools. Somebody probably else needed to take it on and take it further forward. That was kind of the narrative that I'd got. And her very first session with me was to challenge that and say, why have you used all your
gone as far as you can? Absolutely.
Why are you self-limiting? And I talked a lot about, my ego sitting on my shoulder and I have to silence it. And she said, well, hang on a second, isn't your ego the thing that enables you to stand on a platform in front of 700 people and deliver your annual conference speech? So why are you trying to silence it? What's it trying to tell you? So it just changed my mindset. So instead of now going sling your hook to my ego when it rises up, I sort of go, oh, okay, I notice it.
Yes, observe it. Yeah.
Trying to tell me, how do I behave as a witness? So one of my coaches in the past was fantastic. He used to encourage me to be witness to myself.
Yes.
Notice it, engage with it, but not become it. So be able to sort of look at what's going on for me and understand why I'm thinking or feeling or reacting in a particular way. And that's so helpful because it then enables you to critically analyze, but also be massively self-aware as to how you're coming across and what you're doing and how you make the choices you do. So I guess those sort of self-growth pieces have been the things that I think have made the biggest difference to me, but just being really happy that I am who I am. I know myself incredibly well, and I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. So
powerful, because I think when I've always realized that the two things that we're always looking for in life, and I guess this always changing for me as I go on my journey, is that I love myself and I'm enough. And if we can, like you've said there, if we can get to that place and eradicate fear in that way, then and truly your authentic self is that, and there's nothing to hide from there, that you can make a difference just by being you, and it. That's the people around you. That's an amazing place to be. That's an amazing platform to work from. Final question, which again is a very difficult one, and I'm just looking for a short sentence, if you will, a word or whatever, is everything that we've talked about and where we sit right now at the beginning of September 2020 with everything that's gone on, is if there was one piece of advice that you'd leave us all with, or one word or one focus, I know there's many, but there's one major focus that you think right now you have, or that's important, particularly emotionally, for us to stand with, what is it? What's the most important thing right now?
So I'm wrestling between two.
We can give us both. We'll take both.
Right. Okay. So I think the first one is for yourself, which is really work through what is your purpose. Because I think only by knowing why you think you're here and what you're here to achieve, your career, your job is just a means of expression. It's like CFG actually. CFG is not about brilliant SORP accounts. It's about changing the world. It just happens to be through the lens of finance.
Yes.
So, I happen to be the CEO of CFG, but that's not my purpose. My purpose, I think, is for me to bring love into leadership. It's to challenge the way that we do things. It's to behave in a different way. So that's the first one, is purpose. And then the second one is kind of my mantra for now, which is I think we all need to listen more to understand and not to reply. the number of times that we're already formulating a response to something before we've really truly understood what the other person is trying to say and where they're coming from. And I think if we all just listened a little bit more to understand each other rather than to reply, then we'd be in a better place.
Yeah, I've just been struck by that, because as you said that, I'm like, wow, during this interview, how much have I really, and you know, I feel at times I'm listening, but also I fall into that because I'm in a place where I'm looking at, okay, how can I respond, and what's a great next question, rather than just sitting for a minute, taking it in. That's really valuable. Both are really valuable to me, and I'm sure to everybody else. From a purpose place, absolutely, and from our ability to just listen. So Caron, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I'm super aware in 6 minutes I've been told you've got another meeting, so I'll let you go. But it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.